A Ukrainian settlement surpassing the legendary Greek Troy. Social upheaval which led to archaeological excavation. A Ukrainian archaeologist known for dispelling the most famous Hollywood myths. The Mykolayiv Regional Museum of Local Lore. It is thanks to Olvian artifacts that this museum came to be. But half a century later it became a so-called bridgehead for museums in Odesa, Kerch and Kherson. And many decades later, a stupid error of two researchers became a reason to stop the replenishing of the museum's collection with unique displays. For example, its bronze treasure-trove. The treasure-trove of bronze items excavated on the territory of Dikий Sad, or Wild Garden, is very unique to this day. The treasure consists of only 15 items, a dart tip, Celtic axes and a razor that all have analogs among items of other treasures. The treasure-trove of the Wild Garden, which dates back to the 12th century BC, corresponds to the traditional notion of the treasure. But at the same time, it differs from archaeological findings that were transferred into the museum's ownership earlier. We understand word treasure as something hidden in a very remote place. As of today, we know about many treasures troves of the Bronze Era, Sabotine treasures, Belasiria treasures, and treasures of many other cultures. There were a lot of cultures of the Bronze Age living on the territory of Ukraine, but all the treasures were found beyond the settlements and the steppes. It is obvious that the inhabitants of these settlements left their territory, hid the treasure and forgot about it, and only later did modern archaeologists excavate them after several centuries. It was one whole treasure trove. In this case, a treasure is made up of precious valuable items, which are fixed in the context of the settlement. That is, these are exactly the treasures of the Wild Garden. This is scientific uniqueness of the finding. It makes possible to compare bronze items with ceramic ware and other everyday items found on the place of the ancient settlement, and also provides certain information about their owners. The total weight of the treasure is 3.1 kilograms. But who possessed such an amount of bronze items at that time? I think if he was not the first oligarch, then he was a very rich man, very rich. At that time, 3 kilograms of bronze was considered a huge wealth. But all these treasures could have remained buried in the ground. After all, Lazar Slavin, the researcher of Olvia and director of the Mykolayiv Regional Museum of Local Lore, Feodosy Kaminsky, gave up on the excavations on the territory of the Wild Garden settlement. As an archaeological object, it was destined to fail.
Они заложили 5 шурфов.
They made 5 delves and found stone foundations of several dwellings containing ceramic and small bronze items. But there was one interesting fact. According to the conclusion of Savin's expedition in 1956, the settlement was destroyed and was not of interest for the society, because it was a secondary settlement of the Sabotine culture, and he believed that further research was not worth conducting. As a result, research was not conducted on this archaeological site from 1956 until 1990. In the early 1990s, scientists turned attention to this archaeological site once again. The Mykolayiv National Pedagogical Institute arranged a practice for students of the history faculty. Students of the faculty must go through a compulsory archaeological internship after the first year of study. So in order to avoid solving of any money matters while conducting excavation outside the city, the students, together with archaeologists and university professors, continued excavation excavation on the territory of the Wild Garden archaeological site. Yuri Hrebennikov, a local historian and teacher of ancient history at the Mykolayiv Pedagogical Institute, became the initiator of this excavation. The grandiose social upheaval that shocked several modern countries resulted in turning far-reaching plans into reality. At the same time, when Yuri Hrebennikov started excavation on the place of old excavation sites, one of many important events happened in the history of Ukraine. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. As a result of this historic event, a military base that located next to the archaeological site was evacuated from this territory. This gave archaeologists the green light to begin archaeological research on this site. If in 1990 the archaeologists conducted only partial works there, then in 1991, they began conducting regular research missions. First, the excavation was conducted under the guidance of Yuri Hrebennikov, and from 1998 under the guidance of Kirilo Horobenko. Although I came here as a student in 1994, I began taking active participation in that expedition. Carrying out the excavation on this archaeological site became a tradition, and several years later it became clear that this is not just a settlement, but a full-fledged ancient town with its fortification system. In essence, from 1991 to 1994, every year we discovered the ruins of old settlements there. The excavations lasted for a long time, until we eventually excavated a much larger territory in early 2000. But later, in that same year, the local authorities decided that the residential buildings should be built on this site, so to speak, in their own personal financial interests. But archaeologists had to research the place in order to delineate the borders of the archaeological site before new buildings could be erected there. In the end, the research conducted gave rather unexpected results. After the archaeologists had discovered a defense moat in 2004, the issue arose that construction of new buildings on this territory was out of the question, because it is a unique archaeological site of Sabotin, late Sabotin and Bilaziria period, that is situated in southern region of Ukraine and has a fortification system. So it is a very unique object from a scientific perspective. That's why in 2004 we held a press conference where we considered the issue of a ban on construction works. Here, as further research must be conducted. It is hard to believe, but another social upheaval resulted in the continuation of archaeological excavations. Today, Russian and pro-Russian citizens call this upheaval a cause of the war in the Donbass. Specifically, they're referring to the events during the Revolution of Dignity. After the Revolution of Dignity, the new city authorities decided that the cultural heritage of their native land had to be preserved and researched. So over the last 2 seasons, funds for financing the excavations have been allocated from the city budget under the auspices of the Department of Culture. Thanks to this, we managed to make a major breakthrough in our excavations over the past 2 years, because before, in 2014 to 2015, a large section of the settlement was covered with soil. So how did we conduct the excavations? We excavated 100 cubic meters of the settlements, covered it with soil, excavated another 100 cubic meters of the territory, and preserved part of the settlement. We have already excavated 4 hectares of the territory. The settlement existed from the turn of the 12th to 13th centuries BC to the end of 10th and beginning of the 9th centuries BC. We succeeded to excavate a fortification defense system. These are 2 defensive moats and foundations of stone bridges over a ditch. We also managed to discover new architectural objects. Let's compare. If in 1956 archaeologists found 5 constructions, and at the end of the 1990s and beginning of the 2000s, they discovered 10 objects on the territory of the Wild Garden, then at the present day about 50 archaeological objects have already been excavated and researched. Having excavated one of 50 objects in 2008, the researchers found an artifact that highlights the role of the Wild Garden settlement not only in the territory of Ukraine, but also in the history of all of Eurasia. Our friend and colleague Yevhen Olenichenko, who was one of the members of our archaeological expedition, conducted the excavation together with us in the summer of 2008. We removed a ballast layer, started to clean them of the soil, and found a few of hatchets. They lied in different places at a small distance from each other. It became quite obvious that before they lied in one bag, the bag had fallen and the hatchets fell out from it in all directions. The trove consisted of hatchets of different degrees of wear. Several of them had been subjected to exploitation for quite some time. Others were totally new and had never been used. But how the trove have survived until nowadays is a very amusing story, and at the same time it is very interesting and informative, because it highlights the social structure of the society of those times. The treasure was found near the walls of one of the premises, and considering the artifacts, we can say that it was a molder's house. How did it happen that the trove survived until our days? It is quite obvious that a grandfather hid it. His son remembered about the trove, but his grandson forgot where the treasure lied and left the settlement and left the treasure there. By tradition, ethnographical treasures were hidden under a roof, and after the house had been destroyed, they remained near the wall. The scientists can't say for sure why these people accumulated the treasure, but the trove itself tells the researchers about the role and place of the site of the wild garden in ancient trade and economic relations. We will tell you about this, but a bit later. And now let us tell you about the population that inhabited this territory. After all, it is quite possible that the legendary ancient Greek poet and storyteller Homer wrote about them in his works Iliad and the Odyssey. This is just our hypothesis. The fact is that in his book, The Odyssey, in chapter 11, the great poet Homer wrote a story about the journey of Odysseus to the north, which was north of Troy. It is obvious that Odysseus crossed the Black Sea and got onto the territory of present-day Ukraine. And Homer also mentioned in these works that when Odysseus reached the northern Black Sea region, he saw a Sumerian city and its inhabitants. Homer wrote his legendary poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, in the 8th century BC, at the time when the whole world, including Greeks, already knew about nomadic Indo-European tribes of people that in history were called Sumerians.
Но вот интересен другой пассаж. Город и народ. То есть город.
There is another interesting fact about the existence of the city and its inhabitants. If we assume that Odysseus' journey took place at the end of the 13th century, because according to all the data the Trojan War was at the end of the 13th century, then at that time the walled garden was the only fortified settlement on the territory of present-day Ukraine, with its own defense system.
Городом, то есть система обороны есть, это уже огражденное пространство, является только Дикий Сад.
As for all the other settlements, at the present day, we know for certain that 200 settlements in Sabotin and 150 to 200 in Belozeria did not have a fortification defense system. So there is a large degree of probability that Greeks who told Homer about the Sumerians knew these places. Correspondingly, they obviously visited this territory. Learn more about this fascinating history in the next program. What I can say about Troy, the fact is that Troy is a city that is one in the mass consciousness, but in fact there are 9. So it can be said that the discovery of the treasure during the excavations of the settlement in 2008 was a truly a landmark event. If we take Eastern, Lower Dnipro and Western or Central European typology, we will then certainly see that it also proves the fact of contacts between our country and those of Central Europe and the Balkan region.